Sarah Mitchell stood in line at Gate B-17 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, tightly gripping her boarding pass. It was 7:15 a.m. on a busy Tuesday morning, and she could already feel the weight of the day ahead. Her black leather briefcase contained the documents for tomorrow's major presentation in San Francisco, a case that could make or break her career as a corporate attorney. At 34 years old, Sarah had spent the last decade building her reputation at one of Chicago's top law firms. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly in a bun, and she wore a crisp navy blue suit that she had carefully chosen the night before. She had done this routine hundreds of times. Wake up at 4 a.m., double-check her documents, arrive early at the airport, and board her flight without any issues. As the gate agent called for Zone 1 boarding, Sarah took a deep breath and joined the line. A young mother with two small children stood behind her, struggling with their bags. Sarah gave them a warm smile and helped hold the door open as they made their way down the jet bridge. The morning sun streamed through the airplane windows as Sarah walked down the aisle to her seat, 14A. She had specifically chosen this seat, paying extra for the main cabin upgrade to ensure she would have enough space to review her documents during the 4-hour flight. "Good morning," Sarah greeted the flight attendant, Lisa Thompson, who stood near her assigned row. Lisa gave a quick nod but seemed distracted by helping other passengers. The overhead bins were starting to fill up, but Sarah spotted an empty space right above her seat. As Sarah lifted her carry-on bag, a standard-sized black roller that she had used for years, another passenger rushed past her, bumping her elbow. She steadied herself and continued to place her bag in the overhead bin. That's when she heard Lisa's voice behind her. "Ma'am, you'll need to check that bag. The overhead bins are full." Sarah turned around, confused. "I'm sorry, but there's clearly space here," she said politely, pointing to the empty section. "My bag is regulation size, and this is my assigned seat." Lisa's expression hardened. "I've already made my decision. You'll need to check it." Sarah looked around, noticing other passengers easily storing bags of similar size in nearby bins. A businessman across the aisle had just placed 2 bags overhead without any comment from the flight attendant. "I don't understand," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "My bag fits perfectly in this space, and I have important documents I need during the flight. Could you please explain why I need to check it when others are storing their bags?" By now, other passengers had slowed their boarding, watching the interaction. A few had their phones out, though they tried to be discreet about it. Lisa's voice grew louder, drawing even more attention. "If you continue to argue with me, I'll need to call the captain," Lisa warned, her hand moving to her phone. Sarah stood straight, her heart beating faster, but her legal training kicking in. "I'm not arguing. I'm simply trying to understand the policy being applied here. Could you please show me where it states that a regulation-size bag cannot be stored in an empty overhead bin directly above a passenger's assigned seat?" 2 more flight attendants appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. One of them, whose name tag read Mark, stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah took another deep breath, determined to remain professional. "No problem at all. I'm just trying to store my regulation-size carry-on in the empty overhead space above my assigned seat. I have important legal documents that I need access to during the flight." The young mother Sarah had helped earlier spoke up from a few rows back. "She's right. There's plenty of space up there. I don't see why this is an issue." But instead of acknowledging these points, Mark reached for his phone. "I'm calling airport security. We can't have disruptive passengers on board." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This simple act of boarding a plane had somehow spiraled into something much more serious. She could see other passengers exchanging uncomfortable glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. As they waited for security to arrive, Sarah remained standing by her seat, her hand resting on her carry-on bag. She pulled out her phone and began documenting the time, the flight number, and the names of the flight attendants involved. Years of legal work had taught her the importance of recording details in the moment. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Tuesday morning would soon turn into something that would capture national attention and spark a much-needed conversation about bias in air travel. The atmosphere in the aircraft grew tense as passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah Mitchell stood firmly by her seat in row 14A, her phone now in her hand. The morning sunlight streaming through the small oval windows did nothing to warm the cold situation unfolding. James Chen, a marketing executive seated in 14C, had already started recording the incident on his phone. He wasn't the only one. At least 5 other passengers had their phones out. Capturing what they sensed was becoming an important moment. "Ma'am, I need you to stop recording," Lisa Thompson, the first flight attendant, said sharply. Her face had turned slightly red, and her hands were shaking as she gripped her company phone. Sarah replied calmly, "I have the right to document this interaction. I'm not interfering with any airline operations, and I'm simply standing at my assigned seat." Her voice remained steady, though her heart was racing beneath her navy blue suit jacket. 2 more flight attendants pushed their way through the crowded aisle. Angela Roberts, a senior crew member with graying hair and a stern expression, took charge of the situation. Behind her stood David Miller, a younger flight attendant who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the unfolding scene. "What seems to be the problem here?" Angela asked, though her tone suggested she had already made up her mind about who was causing trouble. Before Sarah could explain, Lisa jumped in. "This passenger is being disruptive and refusing to follow crew member instructions about her luggage." Sarah took a deep breath and spoke clearly, making sure her words could be heard by those recording. "I'd like to correct that statement. I have a regulation-sized carry-on bag that fits perfectly in the empty overhead space above my assigned seat. I've been denied storage space while watching other passengers store similar or larger bags without issue." The young mother from earlier, Rachel Torres, spoke up again from row 16. "This is ridiculous. We all saw her politely trying to store a normal-sized bag. Why are you treating her differently?" Angela turned to Rachel with a stern look. "Ma'am, please stay out of this situation." More passengers began murmuring, and several pulled out their phones to record. The business traveler across the aisle, who had stored 2 bags earlier, looked down at his laptop, clearly uncomfortable with the double standard he had benefited from. David, the younger flight attendant, attempted to defuse the situation. "Perhaps we could find a compromise? There might be space in another bin." But Angela cut him off. "We don't negotiate with disruptive passengers. This is a security issue now." Sarah stood straighter, her legal training evident in her composed response. "I want to be very clear about what's happening here. I'm a corporate attorney headed to San Francisco for a case presentation. I have followed every airline regulation. My bag is the correct size. There is space available. I have been nothing but polite. Yet I'm being treated as a security threat. I'd like each of you to think carefully about why that might be." The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Several passengers nodded in understanding, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A businessman in first class stood up to get a better view, accidentally bumping a flight attendant. No one called security on him. Through the windows, passengers could see 2 airport police officers walking quickly toward the jet bridge. The morning sun cast their shadows long against the tarmac. Sarah looked at her phone. 7:43 a.m. Less than 30 minutes ago, she had been standing in line, helping a mother with her children. Now she was being treated like a criminal. "Last chance," Angela announced loudly. "Either check the bag or leave the aircraft voluntarily before the police arrive." Sarah remained calm but firm. "I will do neither. I have done nothing wrong, and I will not be bullied into giving up my rights as a paying passenger who has followed all rules and regulations." The cabin had grown completely silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the subtle sounds of phone cameras recording. Every eye was on Sarah, standing dignified in her navy suit, her carry-on bag still positioned perfectly in the overhead bin where it had caused such unnecessary controversy. As the police officer's footsteps grew louder in the jet bridge, Sarah pulled out her business card and handed it to James Chen, who was still recording. "Would you mind being a witness to what happens next?" she asked quietly. He nodded, understanding the weight of the moment they were all about to witness. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the aircraft as 3 airport police officers made their way down the narrow aisle. Officer Michael Rodriguez led the group, followed by officers Jennifer Blake and Thomas Wilson. The morning sunlight caught their badges, sending small flashes of light across the cabin. Sarah Mitchell stood exactly where she had been, her posture straight but not aggressive, her hands visible and holding only her phone. The cabin had fallen into such complete silence that the sound of the plane's air conditioning seemed unusually loud. "Good morning, officers," Sarah said calmly, before they could speak. I want to inform you that this entire interaction is being recorded by multiple passengers, and I'd like to explain the situation clearly. Officer Rodriguez glanced around the cabin, noting at least 8 phones pointed in their direction. His expression remained professional but cautious. "Ma'am, the flight crew has reported a disturbance." "Yes," Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact. "I was attempting to store my regulation-size carry-on bag in the empty overhead space above my assigned seat when I was singled out and told I couldn't use the available space, despite other passengers being allowed to store similar or larger bags." Rachel Torres, the young mother from row 16, spoke up again. "Officers, we all saw what happened. She didn't do anything wrong. This is completely unfair." Officer Blake turned to the flight attendants. "Could you explain the specific airline policy that was violated?" Angela Roberts, the senior flight attendant, shifted uncomfortably. She was argumentative and refused to follow crew member instructions. "That's not accurate." James Chen interrupted from his seat, still recording. "I have the entire interaction on video. She was completely professional and simply asked for clarification about why she was being treated differently from other passengers." Officer Wilson surveyed the overhead bin in question, noting Sarah's perfectly stored bag and the ample space around it. He exchanged a meaningful look with his colleagues. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez addressed Sarah, "I understand you're a corporate attorney." "Yes, sir. I'm headed to San Francisco for a case presentation tomorrow morning. My briefcase contains essential legal documents that I need to review during the flight, which is why I cannot check my bag." The business traveler who had stored 2 bags earlier finally spoke up, his voice tinged with guilt. "Officers, I have to say something. They let me store 2 bags up here without any question. This doesn't seem right." Sarah maintained her composure as she watched the officers process this information. Her hands were steady as she continued recording, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Unfortunately," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice carrying through the silent cabin, "we've been requested to remove you from the aircraft. While I can see this situation is complex, we must follow procedure." Sarah nodded, having expected this. "I understand you have a job to do, officers. I will comply with your instructions, but I want to state clearly for the record that I am being removed from this flight despite breaking no airline policies or laws." As Officer Blake began to reach for her handcuffs, Sarah spoke again, her voice clear and measured. "Is it necessary to handcuff me? I am complying voluntarily and pose no threat." The officer hesitated, looking at her colleagues. Officer Rodriguez shook his head slightly. There was no need for restraints. "Please collect your belongings, ma'am," Officer Wilson said quietly. Sarah reached up to retrieve her carry-on bag, the simple action that had somehow sparked this entire incident. The movement was calm and deliberate, witnessed by dozens of phones still recording. As she gathered her briefcase, several passengers began to stand up in protest, but Sarah raised her hand slightly. "Please remain seated," she said to them. "Let's not escalate this further. I appreciate your support and witness to these events." The morning sun cast long shadows down the aisle as Sarah walked between the officers toward the exit. Her heels clicked softly against the aircraft floor, each step measured and dignified. Passengers watched in silence, many still recording, as this scene that felt more like a civil rights documentary than a routine Tuesday morning flight unfolded before them. Just before reaching the aircraft door, Sarah turned slightly, facing the cabin full of witnesses. The next words she would speak would transform this incident from a personal injustice into a national conversation about bias, dignity, and the power of composure in the face of discrimination. Standing at the aircraft door, Sarah Mitchell felt the eyes of every passenger on her back. The morning sunlight streamed through the small windows, creating an almost theatrical spotlight effect. Time seemed to slow down as she turned to face the cabin, her navy suit jacket catching the light. Officer Rodriguez paused. Sensing she was about to speak, the entire cabin held its breath. Flight attendants, passengers, and even the other officers seemed to understand they were about to witness something significant. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the cabin, steady and measured, each word carefully chosen. "I want everyone on this aircraft to look around for a moment. What you're witnessing isn't just about a carry-on bag or an overhead bin. This is about something much deeper that continues to happen in our society." She paused, making eye contact with various passengers who were still recording. James Chen's phone captured the slight tremble in her hand, the only visible sign of her emotion. "I'm being removed from this flight not because I broke any rules," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm being removed because someone felt threatened by a black woman who knew her rights and spoke up for herself. I'm an attorney heading to court tomorrow to represent a client, just like any other professional traveling for work." Rachel Torres, the young mother, was openly crying now. Several business travelers had removed their headphones, their laptops forgotten. Look at how quickly a simple request for equal treatment escalated to police involvement. Notice how my polite questions were labeled as argumentative. Observe how my professional demeanor was seen as threatening. Sarah's words echoed in the silence of the cabin. Angela Roberts, the senior flight attendant, had turned pale. The younger flight attendant, David, was looking at the floor, his discomfort visible. To the passengers who spoke up and recorded this incident, thank you. Your willingness to witness and document truth is how change happens. To those who remain silent but are feeling uncomfortable right now, sit with that discomfort. Ask yourself why situations like this continue to happen in 2024. Sarah then turned to the officers. "And to you, officers, I want to thank you for treating me with respect and dignity, even while carrying out these instructions. You've demonstrated that law enforcement can handle sensitive situations professionally." Officer Blake nodded slightly, her expression showing she understood the weight of the moment. Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out her business cards, handing them to both James Chen and Rachel Torres. "For anyone who witnessed this event and is willing to provide a statement, my contact information is on these cards. Please share them with others who want to help ensure this story is told accurately." The captain, who had been notified of the situation, emerged from the cockpit. He stood silently, watching as Sarah delivered her final words. "To everyone here today, remember this moment. Remember how a professional woman, fully compliant with all rules and regulations, was removed from a flight simply for questioning unequal treatment. Remember that injustice doesn't always come with shouting and violence. Sometimes it comes in the quiet enforcement of biased decisions." She turned to the officers. "I'm ready to leave now," she said quietly. As Sarah walked down the jet bridge, accompanied by the officers, the cabin remained silent. Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth and dignity. Several passengers were wiping tears from their eyes, while others sat in stunned reflection. Rachel Torres stood up suddenly. "I'm getting off too," she announced, gathering her children and belongings. "I cannot sit here and be complicit in this." 3 other passengers followed her lead, requesting to deplane in solidarity. The videos of Sarah's speech were already being uploaded to social media platforms. Within hours, her words would reach millions, sparking conversations in homes, offices, and newsrooms across the country. Officer Rodriguez, walking beside Sarah through the terminal, spoke quietly. "Ms. Mitchell, for what it's worth, I believe you handled that with remarkable grace." Sarah smiled slightly, her composure still intact. "Thank you, officer. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is to shine a light on it with dignity and truth." As they walked through the terminal, Sarah's phone began buzzing with notifications. Her measured words, delivered with such composure and clarity, were about to transform a routine flight incident into a national conversation about bias, privilege, and the ongoing struggle for equal treatment in everyday situations. By noon that same day, Sarah Mitchell's words had spread across the internet like wildfire. The videos taken by James Chen and other passengers were being shared thousands of times per minute. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like #SarahMitchellSpeaks and #DignityInTheAir. In her downtown Chicago apartment, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, watching her phone buzz continuously with notifications. News organizations from across the country were calling, texting, and emailing, all seeking interviews. Her LinkedIn profile had gained over 50,000 new followers in just a few hours. James Chen's video, which captured the clearest view of the incident, had already reached 5 million views. The comments section was filled with people sharing their own similar experiences and praising Sarah's composure and eloquence. "I can't believe how fast this is spreading," Sarah murmured to her sister Jennifer, who had rushed over after seeing the videos online. "I was just trying to get to my court presentation." The airline's security footage from multiple angles had also been leaked by an anonymous employee. These additional videos showed even more clearly that Sarah had followed all proper procedures. One camera angle captured the exact moment when the business traveler stored his 2 bags without any questioning, followed by Sarah being confronted for attempting to store her single, regulation-sized bag. CNN, MSNBC, and other major networks were running the story in heavy rotation. The Tyrants read. Attorney's powerful speech about bias goes viral, and airline under fire after discriminatory incident. Rachel Torres, the young mother who had spoken up on the plane, appeared on a morning news show. What struck me most was her dignity, she said, wiping away tears. She turned what could have been just another incident of discrimination into a powerful teaching moment. Social media analysts reported that clips of Sarah's speech had been viewed over 50 million times across different platforms. Celebrities and influential figures were sharing the video and adding their own experiences of similar treatment. The security footage from the terminal, showing Sarah walking calmly with the officers, had also surfaced. It captured Officer Rodriguez's words of respect and Sarah's graceful response, adding another layer to the story that resonated with viewers. Back in her apartment, Sarah's sister Jennifer read some of the comments aloud. This woman just showed everyone how to stand up for yourself with grace. I'm crying watching this. Her words hit so hard because they're so true. As a flight attendant, I've seen this happen too many times. Thank you for speaking up. Sarah's law firm issued a statement of support. We stand firmly behind our colleague Sarah Mitchell. Her handling of this situation exemplifies the professionalism and integrity she brings to her work every day. By late afternoon, surveillance footage from the gate area emerged, showing Sarah helping Rachel Torres with her children before boarding, a detail that made the airline's treatment of her even more striking to viewers. Major civil rights organizations began reaching out, seeking to support Sarah and use this incident to push for broader changes in airline policies. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack trended nationwide, with thousands sharing their own stories of discrimination during air travel. James Chen, whose video had gone viral, appeared on a news segment. I started recording because something felt wrong about how she was being treated. But when she spoke those final words, I knew I was documenting history. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a major publishing house interested in her story. Her sister looked at her with tears in her eyes. You never made it to San Francisco, but you've started something much bigger. Legal experts appearing on news shows praised Sarah's handling of the situation. She demonstrated exactly how to document discrimination while maintaining one's rights and dignity, said one commentator. This will be shown in law schools. By evening, the original videos had been translated into multiple languages, spreading the story globally. Comments poured in from around the world, many noting how Sarah's composed response to discrimination resonated across cultural boundaries. Sarah finally turned off her phone and looked at her sister. I just hope this changes something, she said quietly. I hope the next person doesn't have to give a speech just to be treated with basic dignity. Little did she know, her hope was already becoming reality as the airline's corporate offices scrambled to respond to the growing crisis, and a national conversation about bias and equality took flight. Within 48 hours of Sarah Mitchell's incident going viral, the CEO of National Airways, Richard Thompson, sat in an emergency board meeting at their headquarters. The large conference room on the 30th floor overlooked Chicago's skyline, but no one was admiring the view. All eyes were fixed on the presentation showing their plummeting stock price and the thousands of canceled bookings. The numbers are bad, explained Marketing Director Julia Santos, clicking through slides. We've lost $50 million in market value since yesterday. #boycott National Airways is trending worldwide, and we've received over 100,000 complaint emails. Thompson loosened his tie, his face showing the strain of sleepless nights. The viral videos played on a loop on every news channel, and the airline's response so far had been inadequate. Their initial statement calling it a misunderstanding had only made things worse. Where are we with the internal investigation? Thompson asked, turning to head of human resources Marcus Lee. Marcus opened his folder. We've reviewed all footage and interviewed the crew members. The facts are clear. Ms. Mitchell was singled out unfairly. Our flight attendants violated several company policies regarding bag storage and conflict resolution. Lisa Thompson, the flight attendant who started the incident, had been placed on administrative leave. During her interview, she broke down crying, admitting she had reacted based on unconscious biases. Angela Roberts, the senior crew member, had submitted her resignation. The young flight attendant, David Miller, provided a detailed statement supporting Sarah's version of events. "I knew it was wrong," his statement read, "but I didn't speak up forcefully enough. That makes me part of the problem." As the meeting continued, their phones buzzed simultaneously. Sarah Mitchell had just appeared on Good Morning America. The room fell silent as they watched her interview. "I'm not interested in punitive actions," Sarah said on screen, her composure still intact. "I'm interested in systemic change. This isn't about one airline or a few employees. It's about transforming how we treat each other in everyday situations." Thompson turned to his team. "She's giving us an opportunity here. We need to do more than damage control. We need to lead industry change." Over the next several hours, the team worked on a comprehensive response plan. They brought in diversity consultants, including Dr. Angela Wright, a leading expert in corporate bias training. Civil rights organizations were consulted to ensure their response would create meaningful change. By evening, Thompson stood before cameras at a press conference. The airline's new initiatives were ambitious. First, "We publicly apologize to Ms. Mitchell for the discriminatory treatment she experienced. We are immediately implementing mandatory bias training for all 85,000 employees. We're establishing an independent review board for discrimination complaints. We're revising all service policies to ensure clear, equitable enforcement." He continued, "Most importantly, we've invited Ms. Mitchell to help shape these changes. We're creating a new position, Chief Equality Officer, and we hope she will consider taking on this role." Behind the scenes, Sarah received the offer letter. The position came with broad authority to implement changes across the airline's operations. The salary was substantial, but more importantly, it offered her a platform to create real change. The airline's stock price began to stabilize as the public responded positively to these concrete actions. Other airlines started announcing similar initiatives, not wanting to risk similar incidents. Rachel Torres, the mother who had supported Sarah on the plane, was invited to join a new passenger advocacy board. James Chen, whose video had gone viral, was asked to consult on the airline's new transparency policies. A week after the incident, Sarah sat in Thompson's office, reviewing the proposed changes. "Your response needs to go beyond training videos and policy documents," she explained. "We need to change the culture from the ground up." Thompson nodded, taking notes. "We want to do this right," he said, "whatever resources you need." As Sarah left the meeting, employees in the hallway stopped to watch her pass. Many had watched her video dozens of times, using her words as a guide for handling difficult situations with dignity. The incident that could have destroyed the airline was instead transforming it into a leader in corporate responsibility and equality. Sarah's composed response to discrimination had opened a door, and the airline had chosen to walk through it, embracing change instead of fighting it. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a much larger transformation in how American corporations would approach issues of bias and equality. 6 months after the viral incident, Sarah Mitchell stood at a podium in National Airways' largest training center. As the newly appointed Chief Equality Officer, she faced a room of 500 airline employees, representing every department from baggage handlers to executive leadership. "Change," Sarah began, adjusting the microphone, "isn't just about new policies. It's about transforming how we see and treat each other." The room was silent. Everyone focused on the woman whose dignified response to discrimination had revolutionized their company. Under Sarah's leadership, National Airways had implemented groundbreaking changes. The conference room walls displayed their new achievement, Most Improved Corporate Culture 2024, awarded by Businessweek magazine. Their stock price had not only recovered but reached new highs as investors recognized their commitment to change. Lisa Thompson, the flight attendant from the incident, sat in the front row. After completing extensive bias training, she had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters, now leading peer-to-peer training sessions. "My mistake became my mission," she often told new employees. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing impressive numbers. Customer complaints down 60%, employee satisfaction up 45%, and discrimination incidents reduced by 80%. But more remarkable were the personal stories. Last week, Sarah shared, "One of our flight attendants stopped a similar situation from escalating. She recognized her bias, corrected her approach, and turned a potential conflict into a teaching moment. That's real change." The airline's training program had become a model for other corporations. Companies from tech giants to retail chains were sending representatives to learn from their transformation. Today, executives from 12 major corporations sat in the back of the room, taking notes. Rachel Torres, now heading the Passenger Advocacy Board, stepped up to share her perspective. "The changes aren't just on paper," she explained. "You can feel the difference when you fly. The crew members are more aware, more empathetic, more human." The airline had revised every aspect of their operation. New booking systems that randomly assigned upgrade priorities. Body cameras for all customer-facing staff, with footage regularly reviewed. Anonymous reporting systems for both employees and passengers. Monthly town halls where employees could speak freely about challenges. Partnership with civil rights organizations for continuous improvement. David Miller, the young flight attendant who had witnessed Sarah's removal, was now a regional training coordinator. "We don't just teach people what not to do," he explained to the audience. "We teach them how to actively promote equality in every interaction." CEO Richard Thompson stood up to make an announcement. "Thanks to Sarah's leadership, National Airways will now require all partner companies to meet our equality standards. We're not just changing our company, we're changing the industry." The initiative was already showing results. Other airlines had started implementing similar programs, creating a ripple effect across the transportation sector. The phrase, "the Mitchell Standard," had become shorthand for corporate anti-bias excellence. Sarah introduced their latest innovation, virtual reality training modules that allowed employees to experience situations from different perspectives. Participants could feel what it was like to be discriminated against, helping build genuine empathy. "But our proudest achievement," Sarah continued, "is our scholarship program." The airline now funded law school scholarships for minority students interested in corporate equality work. The first class of Mitchell scholars would graduate next year. James Chen, whose viral video had sparked the change, had been hired to head their new media department. His team documented success stories and challenges, maintaining transparency in their journey toward equality. After the presentation, Sarah walked through the training center's halls. New posters showed diverse faces and bold messages. "Dignity is our priority and equal skies for all." But more telling were the small interactions. Employees of all backgrounds chatting comfortably, sharing ideas, working together without the tension that had once existed. In her office, Sarah looked at a framed photo of the original flight where everything began. "Sometimes," she said to a visiting journalist, "the worst moments lead to the best changes." The airline's transformation had become a Harvard Business School case study. Students now analyzed how one woman's composed response to discrimination had triggered a corporate revolution that was spreading across industries. As Sarah prepared for her next meeting, her phone buzzed with a message. Another major corporation wanted to learn from their experience. She smiled, knowing that what had started as a personal incident had grown into a movement for corporate change that was only getting stronger. The next chapter would involve expanding these changes beyond their own industry. Sarah was ready for the challenge. After all, real change doesn't just happen in one company, it spreads, one conscious decision at a time. 1 year after Sarah Mitchell's memorable stand on that Tuesday morning flight, she stood in front of a packed auditorium at Harvard Law School. The audience included law students, corporate executives, civil rights leaders, and most importantly, the first graduating class of Mitchell scholars. "When I boarded that flight last year," Sarah began, her voice carrying through the hushed room, "I was heading to a court presentation. Today, we're creating a different kind of justice." She gestured to the banner behind her, which read Transportation Equality Alliance, 1-year anniversary. The Alliance, Sarah's newest initiative, had grown from a small advocacy group into a powerful organization with offices in 12 cities. They had successfully handled over 500 discrimination cases, leading to policy changes in airlines, train companies, bus services, and ride-sharing platforms. Rachel Torres, now the Alliance's Community Outreach Director, sat in the front row with her children. Ms. Mitchell didn't just change one airline. She told a documentary crew filming the event. She changed how we think about everyday discrimination. The impact of that morning flight had rippled far beyond the transportation industry. 50 major corporations had adopted the Mitchell Standards for bias prevention. Law schools nationwide now included the incident in their civil rights curriculum. A popular television series had featured an episode based on Sarah's story. Congress was considering the Equal Treatment in Transportation Act. James Chen's original video had reached over 100 million views and was being used in training programs globally. He now led the Alliance's media department, documenting similar incidents and successful interventions. The most powerful change, Sarah continued in her speech, isn't in the policies or programs. It's in the everyday moments when someone speaks up, when someone recognizes their bias, when someone chooses dignity over discrimination. Lisa Thompson, the flight attendant from the original incident, had become a sought-after speaker on personal transformation. She traveled the country sharing her story of confronting and overcoming bias. Sarah Mitchell didn't just change my career, she often said. She changed my heart. The Mitchell Scholars Program had expanded to 20 law schools, funding education for students committed to transportation equality work. The first class of 30 graduates sat proudly in their caps and gowns, ready to continue Sarah's work across the country. National Airways, under Sarah's guidance as Chief Equality Officer, had become the industry leader in inclusive practices. The training program was so successful that they had opened a corporate consulting division, helping other companies implement similar changes. But our work isn't finished, Sarah emphasized, showing slides of recent incidents. Every day, someone faces discrimination in traveling. The difference now is that we have tools, support systems, and a community ready to respond. The Alliance had created a mobile app allowing travelers to report discrimination incidents instantly. It had been downloaded over 2 million times and had already helped prevent numerous escalations. David Miller, the young flight attendant who had witnessed Sarah's removal, now ran the Alliance's training division. We trained over 10,000 transportation workers this year, he reported. Each one becomes an ambassador for change. Officer Rodriguez, who had treated Sarah with respect during her removal, had joined the Alliance's Law Enforcement Advisory Board. His insights helped bridge the gap between security concerns and equal treatment. As Sarah concluded her speech, she pointed to a wall displaying photographs of everyday people who had stood up against discrimination, inspired by her example. "These are the real heroes," she said. The passenger who speaks up, the employee who intervenes, the manager who makes the right choice. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Sarah raised her hand for quiet. "Don't applaud me," she said softly. "Instead, commit to speaking up the next time you witness injustice. Commit to examining your own biases. Commit to treating every person with the dignity they deserve." After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the law school's halls with the Mitchell Scholars. They shared their plans to work in civil rights law, corporate equality departments, and government policy. Back in her office at the Alliance, Sarah kept a framed photo of her navy blue suit from that fateful day. Below it was a simple quote: "Change happens one dignified moment at a time." Her phone buzzed with news of another incident, another opportunity for intervention and education. Sarah picked up her briefcase, ready to continue the work. The lasting impact of her composed response to discrimination wasn't just in the past. It was still unfolding, one conversation, one policy, one person at a time. The revolution in corporate equality that began with a carry-on bag dispute had become a movement that would influence generations to come.